Good morning and afternoon. My name is Cameron McElhenney, and I serve as the Director of Training and Education for the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar series where we'll be discussing how the LAPD Office of the Inspector General works with the media. Before I turn things over to today's presenter, I would like to go over a few things regarding to today's program. During the webinar, all attendees will be muted. As soon as we begin, however, you will have the ability to type in any questions you might have. And when we come to the question and answer portion of the webinar, your questions will be asked and answered as they have been received. During the webinar, you may also send any questions you might have for me as the webinar administrator in the same manner, and I will answer your questions as quickly as possible. With our housekeeping duties out of the way, I would like to introduce you to today's presenter, Julie Buchwald, who has been with the Office of the Inspector General for the City of Los Angeles since June of 2005. She currently serves as the OIG's Community Relations Coordinator. In this capacity, she is responsible for public outreach, social media, and other community engagement. She has worked in several different areas of the office over the years: the Complaints Unit, the OIG Special Projects Unit, and the Use of Force Unit, where she continues to review public reports involving officer-involved shootings and other significant uses of force. Please join me as I welcome Julie Buchwald for today's presentation. Julie?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Cameron, for the opportunity, and thank you to NACOLE. Today, I wanted to just spend a little bit of time with everyone talking about best practices for oversight agencies when dealing with the media or interacting with the media. So as you can see, we can just, here's the title, but we can get into it, Cameron. Next slide, please. These first few slides are foundational, just a little bit of an explanation as to our office and where my role sits within the office. LAPD, or our office, Office of the Inspector General for the LAPD, was founded in the mid-1990s on the tails of the picture you see there is the Rodney King incident in March of 1991. We were established by a voter-approved amendment to the city charter, and you can see here a few just priorities for our office, our mission. Number one, provide strong, independent, and effective oversight of the LAPD. Ensure that the LAPD, its officers, and employees act with honesty, dignity, and respect towards the public. And finally, conduct community outreach to educate the public about our office. So community outreach is really one of our three main priorities for the office, and that's sort of where I fit in. Next slide, please. Here's our organization chart. This is where we sit within the broader structure of the Police Commission and the LAPD. So you see there at the top, the Board of Police Commissioners. These are 5 civilian part-time leaders of the department, almost like a board of directors. They generally set policy and procedure for LAPD. And there, off to the side, you see our current Inspector General, Mark Smith. We report our office directly to the Board of Police Commissioners. And then underneath the Board of Police Commissioners there, you see the current Chief of Police, Mike Moore. So we notice there's no line connecting the Inspector General with the Chief of Police. We are totally outside that command. We do report, however, to the commissioners. So then down below the Inspector General, you see the basic structure of our office. You see the 3 main units there: complaints, audits and reviews, and use of force. Those are our 3 main sections, and each led by an Assistant Inspector General. And then you see me there as a direct report to the Inspector General. Of course, we have some admin staff as well to help us function daily. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background about our staff. We currently have about 30 civilian employees with very diverse backgrounds who work within the 5 main areas that I just spoke to. We actually have about 35 positions that are position authorities for the office, but currently about 30 people working within the Office of the Inspector General. And my section there is the Community Relations and Strategic Initiatives section. This is generally staffed by 1 or 2 people. The majority of the time it's been just me, but there was a brief period of time there I had some assistance, which was great. So if you do have the ability to staff up your community outreach section there, go ahead and do it. Next slide, please. Yes, great. So next slide, yeah. Here's the community relations role within the office. So there are a variety of daily tasks with respect to this section that we conduct every day. Here's just sort of the basic outline of what those tasks are. Number 1, we respond to public messages and inquiries, including from community members, complainants, the media, which is the focus here, outside civilian oversight agencies and offices, and various others. Academics as well, we get a lot of research questions sometimes. Number 2, we communicate with the public about our work and relevant news stories through various social media, namely Twitter, Facebook. We do have a YouTube account, which I'll talk about a little bit. And we also have a public listserv. This is essentially a way to email all our public contacts when we have public reports that come out. These reports come out, at a fairly regular tick. We send them out on email to anyone who wants to receive them. So if you want this report, you'll get it around the time that it's going to be presented to the Board of Police Commissioners. And then finally, we hold meetings. We attend meetings with various stakeholders to educate them about the OIG and LAPD processes. This can be driven by any number of issues. It can be about a specific report, or it can just be pure outreach. Our meetings are they have sort of a wide array as far as what drives our meetings. Next slide, please. One of our more high-profile projects within the section, Community Relations, was we do have a mobile app. I'm not going to take too long to discuss it, but this was a way of giving the community a voice. It's another tool for us to talk about when we go out and have meetings or interact with community members. And it's on there. You can find basic information about our office. People are also able to contact us directly through this mobile app. They're able to email us, file a commendation, file a complaint as well. And they also can read our various public reports right there on their phones. And when it came out, this mobile app, when it did come out, it was presented to the Board of Police Commissioners. It did receive some news coverage as well. At the time, I believe it was the first mobile app for a civilian oversight agency in the country. Next slide, please. So now we can kind of get into the meat of the focus for the webinar, which is, your interactions with the media. So why is it a good idea to do this? I think there are several key reasons why you may want to consider interacting with the media if you're not. Number 1, and you'll hear me repeat this one again throughout our time together. Number 1, to communicate your office's message so that the office will be most accurately and fairly represented. This is a gateway to having some influence over what that message will be. Your contacts with the media are allowing you to have some control over what might be written with respect to news articles and other news coverage of your work. Just note one thing here is that reporters, when they don't have any information from you, whether it be background information or information on the record, one way or another, they're going to go and fill that vacuum that exists with other information from somebody else. And that other person offering a different perspective, they may offer a perspective that is not necessarily consistent with, your office's message. So it's better for you to position yourself and your office in a way, where you're educating the reporter about the issue at hand. So that's number one. Number two, to educate the public about the existence, role, and functions of your oversight agency. And this can lead to enhanced public trust. So think of the media as almost a messenger of your work. Your ultimate audience is really the public. The media is almost the middle person in between. And so in order to get to the public, you're really trying to work through the media sometimes. And ultimately, with respect to the message being communicated well, you are trying to increase public trust with respect to your office and the work that you do. Number three, to reach sections of the public that the oversight agency traditionally has not reached or cannot reach through other outreach efforts. On this, I would say that not everyone has the time necessarily to come to a public meeting or even to read the reports that your office is going to publish, say a 50-page report. Not everyone has the time. So most people do have the time to read, a news article that's going to cover that report in, 2 to 3 minutes. They can read that in a much more manageable way than your report. So it's a way of quickly getting your message out to a broader audience. And number four, finally, to promote transparency by providing insightful information to the public about the law enforcement issues that you oversee. As I think at least some of you probably here know, California just passed a new transparency law that is for the first time requiring certain documents to be released to the public. And this is just one example of how I think we're living in an era of enhanced transparency, more transparency. The public is pushing for more information. And so again, you want to have the most control over that process that can exist. So interacting with your media contacts is one way of ensuring the best possible messages are being communicated about your work, about your law enforcement agency that you oversee, et cetera. Next slide, please. So I have broken up the tips as far as dealing with the media into two basic categories: direct dealings with the media and indirect dealings with the media. We'll talk first about the direct dealings with the media. So when you're actually having a conversation with reporters or otherwise interacting with the media. So number one, I have here, meet and talk regularly with a small number of trusted contacts. So what's regularly? I think that can vary considerably depending on what's best for you and what's best for your media contacts. You can meet once a month if that's appropriate. You might want to be talking more regularly than that. It's just going to kind of depend on the work that you're putting out, the size of your city, the size of your law enforcement agency, and you can kind of, figure out what the best ways to interact with your media contacts are as you go. And also, there may be a very large media market within which you're working in, like Los Angeles, where I am. There is a very large media presence here. I cannot necessarily interact with all these reporters. So my advice is to have a couple of trusted media contacts that you do interact with regularly and try to manage the other ones as best you can, but you don't necessarily need to meet as frequently with everyone. Number two, establish the best way to communicate for both parties. For me, the reporters that I have contact with, they generally like to text, but sometimes if you don't want to necessarily put anything in writing, you may want to opt for meeting in person or a phone call. It's going to be up to you, again, to sort of drive the ship there and figure out what's the best way for me to interact with this particular reporter. And certain reporters like different ways of communicating, so you're going to have to figure that out as well. Number three, meet outside of crisis times so that you have a basis of trust and direct dealings when crises might arise. Understand that trust goes both ways. On this, I would say that just as you might be evaluating certain reporters or people who are covering your office and your law enforcement agency, as far as, who should you trust, they're also evaluating you. And so trust is a two-way street. The reporters, they want to trust that the information they are receiving is accurate. And also, they also want to get a sense from you that you're not BSing them, and that you are, an authority for your office and feeding them correct and, potentially valuable information. So I would say, just again, remember that trust is a two-way street. They're evaluating you just as you're evaluating them. And they also want to trust that you're not going to go, the second you leave, a meeting with them or talking to them, you're not going to go and then, tell the exact same thing to a competitor necessarily. Number 4, educate the media and help them to understand both your department and your oversight agency. Items to consider sharing, and I have a few suggestions here. Methodologies and timelines for projects and reports, background and context for policy change and areas of concern, your office's relationship to the department and how that might change over time. And also, one final thing, try to offer more than no comment if possible, even if it's just context or more information. Again, I think in preparing for this webinar, actually, I looked through some old communications I had with my media contacts, and so much of it was about process, timelines, when something's coming, do you know, approximately when this will happen? Have you heard this or that? So again, they just really want to know a lot about when things are coming so that they can plan their schedules and their stories out of it. So that's very helpful for them. And then on the issue of comment versus no comment, one thing here is I think conversations can ebb and flow between when you're going to be quoted and when you are, I'm actually getting here into number 5. If you want to be off the record, say so. Never assume you're off the record, and clearly articulate expectations. So one thing to note here is that conversations with reporters can ebb and flow between being on the record and off the record. And I think it's very important to establish one from the other. It's okay to ask a reporter to clarify what they're going to do with the information you are speaking to them about. And you can say, this is just on background. I don't want any of this to be quoted. And usually they will respect that. At least I've found that. And conversations that do kind of go from one to the next, it's okay, again, to clarify within the conversation what the expectations are. So don't be afraid to ask the reporter what they're going to do there. Next slide, please. Number 6, be responsive to media inquiries. So even if the response that you do have is essentially no comment, make sure that you call the reporter back or be responsive in some way, because even this establishes trust and the perception that you are being responsive. The worst thing is when you don't respond at all. I think that leaves them with a sense of, again, there's a vacuum there, and they're going to go fill it with information from somewhere else, and that somewhere else might not be consistent with your office's message. Number 7, make public reports and other information that might be in high demand rapidly available, and utilize multiple methods to communicate that information. So in terms of making this public information available, the ways to do that we have found work best are, number 1, post to your website. Number 2, email your reports to your public contacts. And number 3, potentially make your reports or other information available via social media. We'll talk more about social media in a few minutes. But I think that if you do these things, it's really going to save you a lot of time and energy and potentially contacts or questions from reporters if if you just make the information available, then you won't get a bunch of inquiries asking, where's this report? Can I get this report? They already have it. So you're going to help yourself there if you do these things and make information available. Number 8, understand that reporters can be a source for you as well. I talked a little bit about this, but it's okay to ask them too. If you are wondering about a certain story or certain news, have you heard this? They're going to ask you that as well. So it's okay to ask them sometimes as well, because that's going to be an indicator of how big a story might be. And if you, again, are interacting with a reporter that you already trust, you're going to be able to have a decent interaction there about a potential story going forward or not. So use them as a source, just as they're using you as a source. Number 9, network. You'll often find yourself at events, trainings, different law enforcement related, occasions or promotional ceremonies, things like that, with reporters. You're going to be sort of following in their footsteps, and they're going to be following in yours. So I would say it's better to network with them and talk to them than not, because a lot of this is really just establishing relationships. And now I'm, again, getting into number 10, which is develop rapport, focus on relationship building, get to know your press contacts, how they work, and what makes them tick. Again, a lot of this is really just there's a human element to this that I think I can't understate. It's all about, having a conversation with someone as a professional, and the trust, again, is a two-way street. So really get to know them and figure out how they work, how their minds operate, what kind of issues they're interested in, what kind of stories might be of note to them, and try to go from there. And they will respect you all the more for doing that. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a bit about more indirect dealings with the media. And I have 11 best practices here. I did want to note one thing that is actually not included in the PowerPoint, but it's a little bit outside the scope of what we're talking about. But one thing that you may want to consider, if you don't have a social media policy for your office, your civilian oversight agency, that is, you may want to craft one. And when I first was, essentially appointed to this position of being I function as the PIO for our office, I did craft a social media policy for the office so that if I ever left, someone would, step into my shoes and know what to do. Our policy, there are model policies out there. Ours is a combination of one that I think I looked at from IACP, and also the Rady School of Business. I did a course there on social media for professionals, and I think I crafted the policy that we do have between those two. So one thing, again, you may want to think about crafting a policy for your office on social media use and postings. So getting into this is really social media here that we're talking about. And as far as our office, we do have a couple of different accounts, and we do have a lot of press that follow those accounts. So when you post your social media accounts, know that you're still interacting with the press. It's just a little bit more indirect. So here we go with these. Number 1, select 1, 2, or possibly 3 platforms that work for you and that bolster your office's message and communications plan. And I have here ones that have worked for us, but just because they work for us, it doesn't mean that you can't have others, or if you hate one particular platform, you shouldn't use it. Or if you find it difficult, you should use another one, or just even one platform, that's fine too. We use Facebook and Twitter, and then I think we do have a couple of other accounts. I believe we do have an Instagram account and a LinkedIn account, but this is mainly for contact purpose, the purpose of people finding us. contacting us. Know that if people are looking for you on certain platforms, it's really just a way to try to get in touch with you. So you may want to have accounts, but just really use one or two platforms, like I said, that work for you. And then platforms to avoid, essentially Snapchat or anything that your kids use. Anything that's, catchy and picture-driven, video-driven, that may not be the best for an oversight agency's social media, generally speaking. But you may find a way to make it work for you, and that's okay. Number 2, if putting out original content, use neutral, unbiased, objective language. Also avoid police jargon and make language accessible. One thing here is the more neutral you are in your social media posts, the less you are vulnerable to being baited on social media, the less you're going to have those troll type people wanting to interact with you. If you're on the boring side, then you're still educating everyone and being professional, but you're not making yourself vulnerable to attack necessarily. And this is one area where I think, as far as what is neutral and unbiased language, I think it's pretty clear. But if anyone has any questions about that, please ask. And then avoid police jargon. One thing I do consistently in my role here, unrelated to social media, is I edit our public reports, and I'm constantly stripping out police lingo, if you will, to make the reports, understandable to a very average, ordinary person. You want to use language like that almost a 6th grader could understand. So anything too technical in your social media posts, you want to take that out. Number 3, if retweeting, sharing, or liking posts, tweets, or news articles, be cognizant of perception. Recognize that your likes and retweets can be tracked, so be balanced in how you engage online. One thing about this is know that people are watching what you're doing online. As far as, if you're constantly liking or sharing articles about police officers dying, but not of, suspects dying in police-related incidents, well, then you're going to be judged for that. So, and the, analytics can be tracked on social media. So again, just be cognizant of the kinds of things that you are liking and retweeting and sharing. And again, try to be very neutral there. Yes, number 4, this is related. Try not to favor one particular news outlet over another. Try to choose the most accurate article, most robust analysis of the issues. Be balanced here as well. So if you're constantly, liking and retweeting the New York Times, that's okay, but try to get the best coverage of your story or your report that you just published, because that's only going to help you. Again, as far as the critics out there, you want to be balanced in how you are not necessarily endorsing different news outlets, but that you're just covering a wide variety of what's out there. Number 5, focus on quality over quantity of posts. However, the algorithms do focus on frequency of posts and engagement. So find what works for you. Again, I feel like I'm constantly saying in this presentation, find what works for you, but it is very true. I try to post about once a day, at least during the work week, because I find that there is at least something to post every day, but that's not necessarily the case. Some days there is nothing interesting about LAPD that's happened or that we're involved with, and so a day might go by where I don't do anything, and that's okay too. Or you may find that tweeting multiple times a day, sharing things multiple times a day is what works best for you. Maybe if you're just starting out, you post once a week. Again, find what works for you. Next slide, please. Number 6, make clarifications and corrections as needed. Have an accurate online record that matches the work you are doing in real life. Also use correct spelling and grammar. On this, generally speaking, don't delete posts or comments. If something is wrong or inaccurate, especially if a period of time has gone by, you can go in and issue a correction with a new post. If you need to edit something very minor, I would say that's okay. Go ahead and do that with your posts. But we'll talk about this a little bit more later too. But given the notion that you should be archiving everything, it's best not to delete what you are sharing on social media. Number 7, it's unnecessary to respond every time you are tagged, tweeted at, etc. However, if you are tagged by the media, consider responding in some way. So on this, it's good to be responsive, but you don't necessarily need to respond to absolutely everyone, absolutely every single time. If it is a reporter contacting you, with me, I always try to respond in some way, even if that is in a private message or calling the reporter, emailing them, again, to be responsive. And like we talked about, if they don't hear from you, they're going to go ahead and fill that vacuum with feedback and input from somebody else. So try to be responsive, especially to reporters. Number 8, consider letting your work be your substitute for posting original content. This is now only on social media I'm talking. Sometimes we do post our reports or news coverage of our reports. We don't necessarily do interviews specifically about our reports. Sometimes we will be quoted, but often our reports come out, there's news coverage of that report coming out, and we then post the article, and that's it. That's how we let our work stand for what we're doing, rather than giving express interviews about it. Number 9, do a broad brush read on the news of the day before you post anything on social media. Also consider tone. And I say here, be sensitive. One example of this is what we just experienced last week with the New Zealand attack, or 2 weeks ago, I guess it almost was now. If there's a crisis especially in your city, you may not want to be posting pictures of, your staff from a training that was very, happy-go-lucky. You want to get a sense of what's going on out there in the world before posting anything. And this is, again, just a way of protecting yourself, ensuring that you're not going to be unnecessarily attacked for something that's very well-intentioned, mind you, but nonetheless, I try to get a sense of what's going on, and is it okay to post anything today? Usually it is. And if, again, use that very neutral, unbiased, objective language. That's always going to help you. Number 10, consider archiving, given that social media is generally deemed a public record. This, again, we talked a little bit about this as far as unfriending people, unfollowing people, deleting posts or other content. Generally, try not to do this. As far as archiving, there are services out there that exist that can help you archive all your social media posts, as it is deemed a public record. So you can take advantage of these services, or with respect to us, we do have a mechanism at play with LAPD that enables us to archive our posts as we're going. So I've been told anyway. But if you're unfriending people, unfollowing people at a regular tick, that's again something that isn't going to, help you as far as your office's reputation. So again, just try to protect yourself, protect your office, and just, First Amendment wise, it's always best to let people say what they want to say, unless, there's some attack message in the works or something, and they're posting it on your your page or your account. Those are things that you want to handle delicately and differently. But otherwise, I try to let people just say whatever they want to say. And finally, again, find what works for you and be authentic, as this is what will impact your trustworthiness and reputation as an office, online and otherwise. So your social media, if you haven't had a regular presence on social media, you want to try to just eventually find your voice, find your signature, way of handling news as it comes out, reports as they come out, and then people will know what to expect from you, and then that will bolster the reputation of your office and enhance community trust. Next slide, please. I also wanted to include a couple of items for internal strategy for things that might arise, but they're not every day as far as a crisis. So these are preparing for events that are high risk but low frequency. Here, that would mean for us, for example, this is not something we see every day, but there would be a very, very high profile complaint investigation that we were handling specifically against the chief of police. And it might be so bad that, we would need to do a potential press conference about it or issue some kind of statement. So when these kind of high risk but low frequency events occur, have a plan, and you can plan for these things now. This is, discuss in advance details of any press release, like have a mock press release set up so that it's just ready to go when you might need it. And also have a plan for a potential press conference as far as, where this press conference should take place, who should speak, in what order, who should be standing up there around the speakers, what is the message that you're trying to communicate, etc. And then also, if you're at the point where you are crafting a message about a particular issue, again, it's probably going to be pretty high profile. You want to make sure that if you do have multiple speakers, they're all on the same page as far as what those talking points are going to be, because the last thing you want to have happen is an inconsistent message being, put out there by different speakers. So it's always a good idea to, meet ahead of time with all the speakers, explain what the overall message is and what you expect the message to be communicated throughout the press conference. Also anticipate how your message will be received by the public, by, again, the media, and what the consequences of that will be. I'll just give you one example. We had a report come out last week. This is not on what we call data-driven policing strategies come out, and there's now a 2-week period by which the public is able to comment on this report before it then goes back to the police commission for approval. And so our office is actually in the process of accepting comments on that report. And one thing we thought about sort of last minute was, well, when these emails come to us, is there going to be a response? So we had to make sure that, we crafted an automated response that could be sent back to every person who sent us comments on this report. So that's just one small example of how any message you put out there, you need to anticipate what's going to happen after you put the message out and how you're going to handle it. And then finally, understand that your interactions with the media may be, very overwhelming, challenging, but again, in the age of transparency, engagement is key. You want to be the one to, position your office in a way that's going to enhance the reputation of your office, enhance the trust with the community. And you do have the power to do that with regular and effective communications with the media. Next slide, please. For those of you who don't have it, this is just, again, our office notice we're located down the street from LAPD. We're not housed really anywhere close to them, and that's rather deliberate. Here's our office hours and address, and then next slide, please. Here's our basic contact information, our website, email, our social media accounts. We do also have a YouTube channel, but essentially that is just for housing our videos and storing them, and then those videos are posted onto our website. We don't actually use the YouTube account so much. Here's also our phone number, fax number, and again, we have the mobile app. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Julie. We do have some time for some questions. So I will start with the first one that we received. In terms of developing trust with particular reporters, how do you choose whom you want to develop those relationships with?
Yes, that's a good question. So I think a little bit of it is feeling out who you're comfortable with. And again, those couple of tips I had about networking and building relationships, some of it is just going to happen naturally. Now, there might be a significant paper that covers your oversight organization and law enforcement organization. For us, I would say that's the LA Times. Over the time in which I have been the one for the office generally interacting with the media, they've had 3 different reporters that I have, been able to work with. They all have very different styles and very different approaches to how they're covering LAPD. But I would say that since they're the ones who, have covered LAPD most effectively in the past, you always want to have like a decent relationship with the main periodical that's covering your work. So some of it, like I said, is sort of personality driven, and it'll happen naturally. And some of it is driven by who's covering you. That's what I would say. Excuse me.
Okay, great. And just as a reminder to everyone, make sure to type in your question. Everybody is on mute, so if you go ahead and type it in, I'll make sure that your question is asked. Next, we have a question. My executive director is concerned about maximizing the number of visitors to our site, but I also want to be selective in the kinds of entities that I follow. What is your advice?
Interesting. I would say there's not really a downside in who's following you. We have, a wide variety of press following us, community contacts following us, and I also think the more you post information that's going to resonate with a wide variety of people, then you're going to have, a broader spectrum there of perspectives being represented as far as who's following you. I'm not sure it's necessarily, I understand that, your executive director wants to be cautious, or you want to be cautious, but, I don't necessarily think that you need to be. I mean, that might be an answer that doesn't help so much, but yeah, I think that don't be too concerned with that.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Next, we have, under what general circumstances do you have your agency head speak directly to reporters instead of you?
Yes, so that's driven essentially by the nature of the questions being asked and the work that's being covered. Sometimes the Inspector General and I will meet together with reporters and discuss what we're working on. Other times, the Inspector General will be quoted from an actual police commission meeting where he is speaking. Oftentimes we will defer any statement to the police commissioners, which, like I said, those are the heads of LAPD. They set policy and procedure for the department. So it just kind of depends on the issue. But if it's a very critical issue, I will usually not respond myself. I will involve the Inspector General and ask, does he want to handle it or does he want me to handle it? Hello?
My apologies. I was on mute. What is the best thing to do when you make a mistake in terms of public messaging?
Number one, I would say definitely be candid about your mistake. Don't try to cover it up. That'll just lead to a downward spiral and more problems for you. Issue a correction as soon as possible. And again, try to be absolutely accurate the second time around. It's a human thing, making mistakes. And so, again, the sooner you can come out with a correction about exactly what was wrong, the better.
Okay, next we have, with respect to social media, is it okay to just retweet and share articles? What is the benefit to actually putting out original content?
So on retweeting and sharing, one sort of cautionary perspective I have is that sometimes it can just seem as though you're endorsing that headline or that article if you don't contextualize it yourself, at least. And then people might think that you're adopting that perspective. If I do share and retweet, but I always try to, put a little introductory comment on the article. So again, using very neutral, objective, unbiased language so that people don't necessarily think we are ascribing our own view, our own office's position to that particular article's position. The benefit of original content is that, it's coming from you, and it's a way of establishing your legitimacy as an authority on your office and really communicating the messages that you want to communicate. And as far as what our original content is, just to give people an idea, we put out an original tweet and post to Facebook every time there is a serious use of force, what we deem here as a categorical use of force, which essentially is an officer-involved shooting, an in-custody death, or there are a few other categories. But we always respond to those high-level uses of force with someone from our office. We go to the scene within 2 hours of the incident occurring. So I put out there, or someone actually does it on my behalf if it's in the middle of the night, when we are responding to these scenes. And like I said, because we do have a lot of press following us on our social media accounts, that's sometimes the way that they learn about the incident, is our tweet and or post. And then they will go out there themselves. So that's one thing that we do. We also post, occasionally, like I said, about our reports, about process issues. Like I said, that comment period that's currently underway for one of our reports right now, I posted about that recently. We'll, put up content from meetings that we attend where the Inspector General is speaking publicly. We will post about that, trainings, things like that. And again, it's a way of just making your office more accessible, the work that you do more accessible, both to the media, to the public.
Great. Our next question is, if you don't come out of the PR or press world, what advice would you give practitioners about how to learn more about media relations, aside from listening to webinars like this?
Yes, that's a really good question. I would recommend, there are really, really excellent trainings out there. You may want to look into like the MBA programs actually have sometimes press trainings. There are media trainings out there. Or again, as far as building a rapport with your reporters, sometimes they can educate you as well. Just by interacting with them, it's interesting. Sometimes just talking to them, you pick up on how they're working and how they craft their stories, the kind of things that interest them, and how you can be helpful to them. So all of those ideas, I think, further education, trainings, networking with reporters, those are, and yes, networking also within this oversight, civilian oversight world that exists through NACOLE, all good ideas.
Okay, next we have a two-part question. Is there any downside to engaging with the media? And is there any time when you should not engage with the media?
Would you mind repeating the first part again?
Sure. Is there any downside to engaging with the media?
Okay. I would definitely say no, unless you are engaging with someone who has proven themselves untrustworthy. So, if someone has proven themselves untrustworthy, then you just don't know what they're going to write. You don't know where they're coming from. But if someone's an unknown quantity, like I said, we just got a third LA Times reporter starting to cover LAPD in our office. And he, to me, is, somewhat of an unknown quantity, but I don't see any downside to engaging with him and further educating him about the work that we do, the role that we play. And it can only help, I think, bolster how your office is perceived and viewed within the community. And then the second part, when would you not engage with the media?
Yes, are there certain times when you should not?
Sometimes, sometimes there are certain incidents that occur where you might need some time to kind of figure out where your office stands on something. And so I would say if you feel like there's something going on and you need more time, I would at least respond in a way that, communicates that you intend to be in touch soon. If it's impossible to say something like that for some reason, then that's, it is what it is. But I think if you just need to buy yourself some time, and it's okay not to engage, or at least not engage right away.
Thank you, Julie. It looks like that will be our last question for today. And I want to thank all of you for attending today's session. Our next webinar will take place on April 16th, when we will welcome John Alden and Jason Wechter, who will be providing information on conducting compelled interviews. Please look for information in the coming days on how you can register for that next event in our 2019 webinar series. Please also take a moment to look at the information on our upcoming regional events in Oakland, California, and Nashville, Tennessee this year on November 15th in Washington, D.C. Details for this final event will be posted to the NACOLE website shortly. Thank you again, and we look forward to having you at our next training event.
Can I hang up?